nation, 350. But here's worse. Europe gave it in the form of a loan. They get their money back. We gave it in the form of nothing, so I want them to give us something for all of the money that we put up, and I'm going to try and get the war settled, and I'm going to try and get all that death ended.
Well, still on the Ukraine-Russia issue, when pressed at a news conference, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he's willing to give up the role in exchange for his country's NATO membership. His comments come in the wake of the largest single drone attack of the war, as Ukrainian officials say 267 were launched into the country earlier today, causing casualties. Tomorrow, on the third anniversary of the war, leaders will gather in Ukraine for further talks on an end to the conflict. Zelensky said it would be a turning point. Zelensky also said he wants to meet with President Donald Trump to discuss a deal to give the U.S. access to Ukrainian minerals and rare earths before any meeting with President Vladimir Putin. Now let's start to Erol on the latest from the U.S., Ukraine and Russian war, but we'll begin with D.O.G.E. since we had Democrats speak earlier on this. Good to have you, Erol on the issue. The idea of D.O.G.E. is to cut federal costs in America, right? But are you worried as an American that many will lose their jobs? And what happens to those who may lose their jobs? Are they plans? And I want you to answer that alongside with Elon. A lot of people are reporting that he's even in the media more than the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance.
Well, it's a great question, and thank you for having me. I think we have to look at the overarching historical economic trends, right? If people in your audience read economic history, you'll look to Alfred Hayek, you'll look to the road to serfdom. How does a country collapse? A country collapses when its government starts to create a middling or a ruling class. The government's only function for the people should be to provide jobs for the very bottom quadrant of people, such as digging ditches or just general manual labor, so there's a dignity at the bottom. And then the very top people, your top scientists, your top medical professionals, maybe your top lawyers, these kind of things. The idea that we've created a PMC, professional managerial class of unelected, unfireable bureaucrats that have been running this country poorly is a huge problem, and it predates the collapse of a lot of civilizations. You can, easy example, look at how Czechoslovakia collapsed. You look at it and you go, wow, everybody worked for the government. Well, that's not what we want in America. So if you're going to lose your job at the U.S. government, that means that you're not providing value to the U.S. taxpayer who's paying your services. You need to go into the real world and compete with the rest of us. And the great thing about that is that America has so many opportunities. It has great credit systems. It has great options for entrepreneurship. That's one of the American pioneer ethos, entrepreneurship. So the idea that these people are going to lose their jobs, well, their jobs were at the behest of we, the taxpayer, and we, the taxpayer, would like a smaller government. So it's now incumbent upon them with their generous severance packages to rejoin the real world and actually compete in a mercantile economy. This is not a charity case. This is not how you run a real progressive country. This is how you run a country that's dying. So the idea that D.O.G.E. is cutting these wasteful and useless jobs, that's only going to help the U.S. taxpayer, because that money is going to be diverted, hopefully, towards programs that can assist, whether it be with the drug problems, whether it be with the housing shortages. These are the things that the American people want. We don't need a fifth or sixth administrator to go and make a committee. Once again, this is how countries just collapse and fail. So to answer that, I think it's great, and I'm very excited for those American citizens who've wasted their lives in government. Now they have a chance to go do something meaningful and actually achieve something. So that's a great opportunity for them. Regarding Elon, keep in mind, Elon was part of the package. So people on the left might have been shocked, like, we're not electing Elon Musk, but people on the right or the Trump side, we absolutely were electing Elon Musk to go in there and do what he's doing. And his role would be more visible than J.D. Vance, as J.D. Vance is a junior level person compared to Trump in terms of global statesmanship. He's not going to be given the same, initial view look as Donald Trump is. So he's more behind the scenes, is what I'm trying to say, probably a little bit inarticulately. He's more of a behind the scenes operator in the beginning of his tenure as vice president. So I think it's great that Elon's out there. He's the face of D.O.G.E. And the cool thing about this department is this department will close on January 4th, 2026. The whole point of D.O.G.E. is to come in, find waste, eliminate it, and then eliminate itself in its final form. And with that, I think you would see Elon Musk step away. from a more public figure, and you're going to see the emergence of a traditional vice president in J.D. Vance as he starts to build his public and international profile as he was an unknown figure beforehand.
Now, that's quite saucy for you to say, some Americans who've wasted their lives serving, federal jobs should now get into the real world. The word, wasted lives there could find, Republicans could, get upset with that. But let's move to the peace talks now with U.S. and Kremlin. They are meant to hold these peace talks, in Saudi Arabia without Ukraine. Why do you think that is?
Well, Saudi Arabia is an interesting choice. If you had, gone back in 20 years and said Saudi Arabia is hosting any peace conference, people would be confused. But I think you have to look at this multipolar world order that Marco Rubio has spoken about. And Saudi Arabia is going to have quite a large role to play in the redevelopment of the modern Middle East, a Middle East where the U.S. is trying to extricate itself and remove its foreign influence and get its imperialistic talons out of there. Well, one of the things there is you're going to need local governments to step up. And when you look at the situation in Gaza or some other situations, Saudi Arabia is going to be a big player there. So the idea that they would perhaps be the negotiating location for this doesn't surprise me now. They're an OPEC state. There's a lot of petroleum that is tied to this war. If the price of oil goes under a certain amount, Vladimir Putin can't afford to continue a war. So it seems like an interesting choice at first glance, but I don't think it would be. I think you want to have the peace talks in a neutral setting, and we're used to doing that in a Brussels or a Paris. And I think the world is moving farther to the east. So Riyadh is now becoming a center of peace for global negotiations. I can't say it's expected, but it doesn't seem to be a bad thing. And certainly it's at least where people have agreed to talk, and that's what we're hoping for more than anything: detente, conversation, and peace.
Now, Zelensky said today he is willing to sacrifice his position for peace in Ukraine. What's your assessment of that statement? It seems like Donald Trump is getting what he wants.
Well, Zelensky specifically, I think that he wanted peace in exchange for NATO membership, which is not going to happen in the current form. I mean, the idea that we would move NATO's border right up exactly against the only adversary it's made to buttress is illogical, because then any border skirmish or this current war would have invoked Article 13 or whatever it is that would get all of us into a world war. So Zelensky, of course, is angling for something he's not going to get. We're never going to allow a border state like Ukraine to be in NATO, at least under the Trump administration. But the idea that we can make concessions, that we can give a bulwark to Western Ukraine, that we can bring them into the world order as we have, create financial incentives and joint ventureship partners between America and Ukraine, that's going to be where it is. But when you look at the real numbers, all of the value, mineral value, was in the East. That's where Vladimir took it. There's roughly $20 trillion of mineral value in the East. And let's say Vladimir Putin has lost 500,000 soldiers. All right, that's $40 million per head. So Zelensky is in a very bad position negotiating wise. He has a lot of land, but the land with the value has already been taken by the Russians. So now Zelensky needs to sue for peace in whichever way he can. And I commend him and respect him for obviously going for the biggest prize on the table. He won't get that, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't try. And that doesn't mean that the American people or Donald Trump shouldn't be sympathetic to the Ukrainian position in wanting those security guarantees. So it's going to be very much important for Donald Trump and his people around him to be sensitive of the Ukrainians, because I feel like they feel a little bit put out right now. But the fact of the matter is, it's USA and Russia need to sit down and discuss things, and then Ukraine can come in and work with us. And I think that peace is going to be found, and Zelensky is going to have to make concessions, but he will not get the NATO concession he's hoping for.
Now, the U.S. contributing about $350 billion in defense and security from the start of the war is huge. So how can the U.S. ensure these monies are realized back, since it's not a loan to Ukraine, unlike the EU's deal with Ukraine? Plus, is this why Trump is also handling Ukraine differently in all of this?
I think it is why he's handling a little bit differently. It's in some way like the prior administration was very incompetent. The leader had obvious signs of mental decline. So the idea that he's signing blank checks that we can't get back is kind of frustrating. It is interesting that Europe gave their money on contingency and we gave our money out of nothing. Can Donald Trump claw it back? Probably not, considering that Zelensky himself has admitted that about half of the money you can't find anyway that's already been given. So I'm not quite sure that they're going to be able to get much back. I think the only way to recoup anything would be in these future mineral rights deals, which again, they're not exactly set in stone yet. The valuable minerals are in the East. So I don't think Donald Trump is going to have a very easy time clawing the money back, and I think it's very frustrating for him to have inherited this problem. So he's looking for some way to get a win here, but I think he's gonna come up short because that money is simply gone, and Ukraine doesn't have any way of paying it back. And I don't think it's behooves the American people, or it would be a good look for us, or a way to show leadership if we were to strip mine Ukrainian resources in exchange for the money we've given them. I think it's best for all, including Donald Trump in the end, to let this money go if that is indeed the case, because we don't want to be seen as though we're there trying to profit off a war that's already killed a million lives, and it's already a terrible thing. So we want to make sure that we're sensitive to that.
Right. Now, Trump is dealing with Russia on a different level. Tell me what agreement could come out of this for Russia and the U.S.
Well, I think it's going to involve sanctions and finance. So you're going to look at where can Russian companies be reintegrated into the world order? What does Russia need to do in terms of future promises to never aggress further? Where can lines be drawn? What can Russian oil be done in the international market? Perhaps that's why Saudi Arabia is such an important broker here. And I think that's where it's going to be. It's going to be a way to try to reintegrate Russia back into the global world order, into the G7. Because if you don't do that, then you have a perennial pariah. And then that is only going to create greater consternation and greater sense of disconnection, which will then lead to further conflict. So, as much as people hate to admit it, Vladimir Putin, in many ways, has played the Americans and the Europeans like a fiddle. And right now, he's going to sue for peace on his terms because he has lost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lives to take that bit of leverage. So Donald Trump doesn't have a lot of leverage in terms of the Russian side of things, but he does have a lot of leverage in the international side of things. The U.S. Navy, for example, guarantees international shipping rights. Russian manufacturers can be re-welcomed into the world order, but it's going to come down to hard-nosed peace talks. Russia's going to have to make a lot of concessions. Potentially, there's going to be a lot of money that's frozen in the EU. Maybe Russia will not be able to access that money until they show certain good faith. There's hundreds of billions of dollars there. So I think it's really going to come down to just an argument between accountants in the end to see where we can reintegrate our economies. If you reintegrate economies, then you reintegrate peoples, and then you have detente, then you have dialogue, and you have a more verdant future.
Really interesting insight. Thank you so much, Erol, for joining us all the way from California on Arise America. There's plenty more to come, including